Flats or houses, which one should you buy? In this video, we're going to go through the key points of both to help you make a more informed decision, so stick to the end. So I recently had a friend come up to me and ask me, he said he wanted to buy a place, but he wasn't quite sure which one to buy, whether it was a house or a flat, and he was just asking for my advice. And I said to him essentially that there's not really any right or wrong. So with flats, flats tend to be cheaper than houses really. And the maintenance on them are also quite low because you don't actually own the building, of course. You own just a tiny little part in the entire block, but you don't actually own the building. So when it comes to doing the maintenance and stuff like that, it's not really down to you, hence why you pay a service charge. So flats are what we call leasehold properties. Essentially what a leasehold means is that you're just leasing part of the building. So you don't actually own the entire block, of course. You only own part of it. And the freeholder is a person who owns the ground underneath. So that's the difference between freehold and leasehold. And what you have to be careful is that you need to check how long is left on the lease on the apartment. So you might often see on Rightmove when you're scrolling, it says leasehold and then 999 years left. So that's how long is left on the lease. So you want to make sure, to be safe, that it has at least about 125 years left on the lease. Now, once you start going on anything below, I think it's 80 years left on the lease, then it starts to become really difficult to get stuff like a mortgage or lending on the property, or the rates that you get are not very favorable for you. So you need to be very, very careful when you're looking at that. Now, you can pay to increase the lease. Let's say there's 80 years left on the property, or there's less than 80 years left on the property, like I mentioned earlier. Now, you can pay to extend it, but that will cost you, I think it's like £4,000 to £5,000 plus legal fees to do so. So be careful. Make sure you look at that. Now, one of the main cons about apartments or flats is the service charge and the ground rent, which I just mentioned in terms of calculating your numbers. So, for example, if you're renting a property out for £800 a month and your mortgage is £300, normally you'd have to factor in your management, your maintenance, and those would be the only costs after that. But then when it comes to flats or apartments, you also have to factor in your ground rent and your service charge as well. So those are added costs which really reduce your profit margins compared to a property. So those are really numbers that you have to figure out and calculate when you are working out what your profit is going to be if you want to rent out a flat. And obviously you just have to make the numbers work at the end of the day. And finally, when renting out a flat, you're going to get a high changeover of tenants compared to a normal buy-to-let property. And now that's because when you're renting out a flat, mainly the demographic of people are going to be housing is typically going to be like your students or you're a single person or maybe just a young couple who maybe they're saving up for a house, because oftentimes people use apartments or flats as a stepping stone for them to go and get a house. So your changeover of tenancy is going to be quite high, and that's going to leave you with your letting costs that you're still going to have to pay. You're still going to be liable for the council tax as the property is vacant. So a high changeover of tenancy is also something that you're going to have to factor into the equation. If you compare that with houses, you're typically going to get like sort of a family that's got kids and there's a school nearby that they want to live close to. Once you take those into consideration, it's very unlikely that family is going to be moving out after 6 months, 12 months, or even 18 months. Most of the time, it's a long-term tenancy when you start renting out to families. And oftentimes what that means for your income is that it secures your income. You've got peace of mind that the tenancy isn't going anywhere. And simply just building a good relationship with your tenants, because that's also important at the end of the day. Now, with houses, it's different. So earlier I mentioned about the leasehold. So with houses, 99% of the time is going to be a freehold property. And like I said earlier, that means that you own the ground that the building is on, so that the house is on. So you can do what you want really with the property. So you can build an extension, you can add an extra bedroom in terms of a loft without having to get permission from the freeholder, because you're the freeholder. Because with flats or apartments, if you want to do all that, you need to check that every single thing is allowed before you do it, which can be quite a nightmare. Yeah, and let's not forget, you don't have to deal with any ground rent or service charge or anything like that at all. Now, you will have to set some money aside for management and maintenance, but those are costs that you have to factor in anyway. Now, let me know what you think. I know this was only quite a short video, but let me know what you think in the comments. Would you buy a flat or would you buy a house? What do you think is better for you? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. And if you want to make sure your next property investment isn't a disaster, watch this video here to watch all the mistakes that I did and how you can avoid those mistakes yourself.